Mr. Joseph Beasley is as important to the ARC as any, and tonight we are pleased to award him with the Excellence in the Treatment Award in recognition of 10 dedicated years of service.
If you ever in need and you call Mr. Beasley, he'll be there for you. He's always been there for me.
He's not the kind of guy that seeks to be patted on the back all the time and to get accolades and all that kind of stuff. He does what he does because he believes in what he's doing.
Joe goes where it's dark and light eventually comes. He may go where there is no light, or there are no lights. He is the light.
His journey began in December 1936 in Inman, Georgia, located in Fayette County, which was mostly comprised of farmland worked by sharecroppers like Joe's parents. This would be the birthplace of a visionary.
We were sharecroppers, which means that we worked for the landowner with the idea that half of whatever was grown and gathered and harvested and sold, that we would receive half of the proceeds and the owner would receive the rest. But of course in the sharecropping days, we didn't have anything to do with the books, and so the white people kept the books. And of course we didn't have money to buy our own food, so the sharecropper owner, the owner of the land, would go and shop, and then they would put it on the book, and at the end of a year, you'd always come out in the hole. Really was just a step above slavery. In fact, there was no law that a white man had to respect with respect to African-American black people. No rights. I had a very unusual father, quite frankly. He was one that was not subservient. He never saw himself as a person that had to abide the white man's rules. And as a matter of fact, even during that time, there were certain Negroes that white people know you just don't bother with that person. And so my father was one of those kind of people. And so while we were sharecropping, my daddy made liquor. He was a bootlegger. Back then, men for the most part didn't attend church. They would bring their children and their wives to church, and very few men participated in service. And like my daddy, when he would come, rather than being inside the church, he'd be outside. They'd be outside drinking liquor, shooting dice, and so forth. So, but church was a thing for women and children for the most part. But this is where, the formative years, and as a matter of fact, this is where I'm going to be buried. My mother made full care that she'd have a place for all of us to be buried, and right in the back here is where my mother's and where my plot is laid out. We had made up our minds that we were going to leave the next day. My sister going to Atlanta, me going on to Cincinnati, and so back those times. We didn't have really workable clocks, if you will, and our hours were real clear. White people made it clear to us. Your hours are sun up to sundown. Don't let that sun catch you in that house. Some of us left, and quite frankly, with the coming of automation, farming was no longer labor intensive because the tractor and the combine and the cotton pickers that came along, and so they kind of displaced us. But when we left, some of us stopped in Atlanta. Others of us went on to Cincinnati, to Cleveland, Detroit, trying to get out of the South. And we simply wanted to get out of the South, get across the Mason-Dixon line. And I graduated as the most likely to succeed, which was kind of phenomenal, quite frankly. And looked around for a job, couldn't find one. And so the option that was left for me was the military. And so I joined the United States Air Force in December of 1956.
Due to his unparalleled work ethic and dedication to excel, Joe ascended up the ranks in the military very rapidly, receiving several promotions. He also began to see that things weren't always equal, and that there were times when blacks seemed to be forgotten or ignored. Joe was responsible for making several changes in the military as it relates to recognizing blacks and equal treatment. He began a group called Brothers United.
In the military, one of our struggles is that we wanted to have a soul food day. We had the Irish Day, Mexican Day, and so we demanded, we want a soul food day. And not only we want a soul food day, we want our food. We want chitlins. You white folk, that's the only thing we had to eat back then. We got used to them, we love them, we want them, we demand that they be put on the menu.
This would become Joe's first of many efforts to organizing a group to fight against social injustice. 4 years after the end of Vietnam, Beasley decided his work was done in the military, and he was needed back at home, which was now in Kansas City, where Joe had met a special lady during a leave from the military about a year prior. Her name was Sandra, and she would prove to be the raw material needed to craft a link.
We met seriously through him rescuing my cousin and helping him to get back into the Air Force without being AWOL. And so I naturally was very appreciative. And when he came to my home with my cousin, I was not really interested. But we sat there and we ended up talking all night long. My cousin went to sleep, just laid down on the floor. We talked so long. And I was most impressed with his mind. And he gets offended when I say that, but that was the first thing that impressed me was his mind.
Joe was a veteran military, but also very sensitive to civil rights and social justice.
Joe decided he'd found his next career. He retired on Friday, and Monday he became the executive director of Operation Push, Kansas City. Joe had to realize his purpose and what he had to do to fulfill it. This would prove to be a difficult task.
Joe was a very active young man in the years we're talking about. He was with the Push, and I was doing community work. It was around the 70s in Kansas City, Missouri. He was always involved with people and always concerned about the poor and concerned about rights for people.
What drives a person to continue the fight when he feels like he can't go on? Where does the motivation to continue the fight come from?
I'm known as the Southern Regional Director of the Rainbow Push Coalition, which is a wonderful experience working with Reverend Jesse Jackson. But really, my livelihood comes from the Antioch Baptist Church North. I've been there for well over 20 years with Reverend Cameron Alexander, who's the pastor of the church. Yeah, we have to do for our own people.
I met Joe Beasley in connection with Operation Push. Joe can be a pit bull, and then he can be a domesticated cat. And he's at home wherever that's needed. It's almost instant with him. It was like instant coffee. There's already coffee ready to drink. It just needs some water, hot water, and it's coffee. I think that's what Joe is. He's always alert and ready to represent justice, truth, and righteousness.
I guess the reason why I met with that guy was that they were touting the fact that 60 years ago they had the good sense to open up the playing field to African Americans, who in the past, as you well know, they were suggested black people didn't have enough common sense or whatever to play baseball. But they were celebrating that on the 15th, and then when you go back and just kind of look at the facts, you know, we find out there was no African American whatsoever on the team, and so that's unacceptable in Atlanta in 2007.
I just, I guess, don't know any other way other than be just straightforward and say what I
believe and believe what I say. And sometimes it's not so-called politically correct, and sometimes people could take some offense. But I think in the long run, if you're honest and straightforward and for real, that, you know, ultimately, and I'm not always right. That's the other side. I'm not always right. But if I'm wrong, I'll be willing to come back and say I'm wrong.
Joe became a part of the fabric of Atlanta, quickly became known as a community advocate, not for speaking or being in the news, but for making things happen and fighting for equal rights and fair treatment for blacks.
In order to do this kind of work, you have to have the kind of determination and steadfastness that Joe has.
Poor people is at the bottom of the ladder as far as the power that be. And let's push them out, push them, and let's make the city safe for the, you know, for wealthy people. And Peachtree Street has historically been a street that black people have not been welcome on. We go all the way back to 1906, the riots and so forth.
That's right.
And we've talked about sanitizing Peachtree Street and all kinds of different names. But then when Ms. B. Wardlaw's mother, I guess, that she's just tired of it, and she gave us the money to buy this building. And we've been fighting ever since.
For his unwavering commitment to fighting for consumer and labor justice and for the rights and dignity of the oppressed throughout the world, Joe was awarded the Citizen of the Decade.
Joe's been a partner to me personally and partner to the Atlanta Food Bank. He's the moral force, I would say, in Atlanta. Somebody that I can depend on, somebody I depend on for advice, certainly in the creativity of Antioch and Joe. We have created many new ministries there, and we've shared those around the city.
Beasley has been the link to make sure legal rights have been upheld on numerous occasions. He was a key figure in the lawsuit filed against Coca-Cola that accused Coke of discriminating against African Americans in pay, performance, evaluations, promotions, and terminations. The lawsuit resulted in the largest settlement in Coke's history for African American employees who were affected.
Then what we said, well, we don't have to drink Coca-Cola. Us might drink Pepsi. Us might. And when they saw that we were serious about that we're not going to drink Coke if it didn't sell us a bottling company, right? So they said, oh, you're really serious? Sure, we'll sell you a bottling company. so we broke that down.
Joe was also the coordinator of the Coalition to Change the Georgia Flag. Joe spearheaded this effort to change the flag that represented Georgia. The emblem was originally adopted not during the American Civil War period, but in 1956 during the height of the fight for desegregation.
Joe Beasley is real concerned about health care and concerned about the homeless, and we march and we picket on that. BP service station. We marched and we picket for weeks at those service stations because of the way they treat their employees. When it comes to franchises from these large corporations, many of them do not want to include blacks. And one of the things that Reverend Jackson talks about, and Joe Beasley and Reverend Jackson work together on, is leveling the playing field. And it's all about economic development and access to capital. And that's one of the things that Joe Beasley does. He gets these large corporations and demand that they have blacks on their boards and demand that they treat their employees fairly. It's about hiring and promoting African Americans.
At first, I didn't think I was going to get along with him, but I've had an enormously rich experience knowing Joe Beasley. We first got involved working with underdog boys in a couple of projects. Secondly, we got involved with an issue with the Boy Scouts, which needed to be cleaned up. I couldn't do anything about it, although I was a member of the executive committee of the Fulton County Republican Party, until I got connected with Joe Beasley. Joe's a person who, he's very disciplined, he's very direct, he's very effective.
The interim government said, well, they hoodwinked them again. And they renegotiated the contract, Firestone did, for a 50-year extension. The terms changed. Instead of paying them 6 cents an acre, Brother Leader, they said for the next 50 years we're going to give you 50 cents an acre. In 2005. That is damnable. Now what I said, I've been going to Nashville, and I said to Firestone, I don't give a damn what President Lee Johnson thinks. She might think it's all right. I don't think it's not all right with me, damn it. We're going to change it. And so those are just two little anecdotal kind of things that is going on. But I think if we, as a group of people, will come together, God has fixed it so. This is the century of Africa. And the last thing I'll say is this, which I'm sick and tired of, is this white privilege.
The youth must be prepared to understand the full spectrum of civil rights, and they must be prepared to abide by the law, but they must be prepared to defend all the rights that have been enshrined in the Constitution and in various other documents, because that is what makes the future.
They need to be aware of the power they have in them. They have the ability to make change, but they can only make change if they utilize the ability in them.
If we want a good future, we need to dream a lot, and we need to do things to make our dreams come true.
Joe's efforts didn't stop here in America. This chain has extended across the globe in order to fulfill Joe's mission for justice. In 1994, he worked with the African National Congress to register voters for the election that swept Nelson Mandela into power.
We're viewed, quite frankly, as Africans. That's the way white folks see us. We're Africans. And when you get stopped in a roadblock here in Atlanta, they're going to ask you whether you're from Sierra Leone or Vine City. You're an African. And until we get that part of it straight, we're going to be frustrated.
As well as being the Southern Regional Director of the National Rainbow Push Coalition, Joe is the president of African Ascension, an organization he formed to develop economic and political ties for descendants of Africa located across the globe. The mission of African Ascension is to help unify and assert the political and economic power of our people in the international arena.
So we have to talk, and we live in a world now where diplomacy is the way, not power. It's not by power, not by might, but we have to work together. We're in one world.
When Joe talks, people listen. When the need arose to have supplies to save lives in Africa, he was instrumental in soliciting corporations to assist in securing and shipping over $3 million in needed medical supplies and equipment to Liberia. Recently, Joe quietly celebrated a victory he had been working on for years. This was to get Coca-Cola to move the corporate headquarters for Coke Africa to Africa.
The headquarters for Coca-Cola Africa was in London, England. And what I said to Coke is, that is an insult to the billion black consumers. You move that headquarters from London on the continent. I'm not telling you where to move, just move it.
Joe has demonstrated through his activism and his activism around civil rights and politics and the criminal justice issues and economic development. He is no doubt someone that we can rely on to always be on the cutting edge of issues.
We're still in a horrible dilemma because we have more young black boys in prison than in college. It is a damnable situation. We have 1 million black boys, and quite frankly, many of them are really just they're political prisoners because there's a dearth of opportunity. There's no jobs for the mass of our young people, and so they're locked up. But when we tie that, when we look at Brazil, And of course, in Brazil, I think they had the bleaching theory, where they were going to bleach the black out of you, and of course it hadn't worked. And so, I think so many of my Brazilian friends, sisters and brothers, are living in the favelas of São Paulo and Rio, on the very margins of society. And unless something happened to release that valve, you know, there's going to be real trouble in Brazil. What we're doing, we're trying to marry our struggle with the struggle of the people in Brazil. And so, I guess 5 years ago or so, I met Afro Bras. Ruth, as we are marrying the struggle, and as Ruth went about to try to establish a university there in Brazil, we were instrumental in trying to force the multinational corporations to be supportive.
To acknowledge that, they honored him by naming the library at Zumbi dos Palmares College in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in his honor. The picture continues to grow. The schedule he keeps continues to grow. Things are going on that a lot of us don't think about. The picture is global. It won't be done until Africans everywhere have some sort of power. Joseph H. Beasley still resides in Atlanta, Georgia, and his work continues.
The sergeant doing what he was told to do by these rules that you all got set. And impossible job. Telling me I got to move on. He's just doing his job. I know what he's doing. You know, we fought for civil rights, for the rights of African Americans. Peachtree Street historically has been a place they call a commerce. It's a place where white people do business, and black people, you know, was never welcome on Peachtree Street. And as the Lord has fixed it, you know, we used to not have black police officers. Black people didn't have enough sense to be a cop. Now we got the chief of police is African American, the mayor's African, and yet our rights are violated, and it's untenable. Something just going to have to be done about it. I'm just outraged beyond belief.
Working around and being around a guy like Joe, the script doesn't change. The setting may change, but the script doesn't change.
Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto the mountains, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done.